أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وتلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس وقال الله تعالى في مقام آخر وذكرهم بأيام الله صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Inshallah, today we'll be talking about the beginning, broad strokes of the Ottoman Empire. How did it come to be? What made them so successful? What kind of era did they live in? But more importantly, across various Muslim circles, there is this incredibly wrong notion that Islam has been in a decline since the sack of Baghdad, which happened in 1250. But this myth, which has always been a myth, and it was started by Europe when they colonized India, that Muslims have been in decline since the 13th century. But what we're going to see with the Ottomans, the historians say in 1299, which is 50 years after the sack of Baghdad, right? And to show that Muslims have always resisted, but really the great age of Islam starts in this era. It starts with the Ottomans. It starts, we're going to do Taymur al-Lang tomorrow, inshallah, and then after that we'll do the Mughals, which is Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur. And the purpose of this is that as Muslims, many of us are taught what? Just, the Seerah, the Sahaba, and this is incredibly important. Nobody's denying that. And then you have Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and Salahuddin, and then that's it. Right? This is the whole history of Islam that is presented to us. For 1400 years, Muslims have lived in this world, and we've only had a good 150 years. I mean, how depressing is that? Right? This is not our past in Islam, and this is something that I realized when I studied, spent 5 years in South Africa, and then when I went to college and in undergrad, and I took an Ottoman history class, and it blew my mind away, because what I had been fed, as a Muslim in America, was that Muslims have been in decline since the Arabs stopped ruling. Right? That as soon as non-Muslims, or as soon as non-Arab Muslims entered the picture, Muslims, which is absolutely not true. The farthest that Muslims have ever extended themselves was with the Ottomans. We know as the largest empire, the largest Muslim empire was the Ottoman Empire. It ruled, does anybody know how many centuries they ruled? 600 years. 100 years ago, the Ottoman Empire was still there, by the way. It was their last year. They ended it actually in the year 1923. The Sultanate ended, and in 1924 the Khilafah ended. But 100 years ago, the Ottoman Empire was still there, and it started in the lifetime of Maulana Rumi. Imagine that. From Maulana Rumi's life all the way up until our grandparents would have been born when the Ottoman Empire was still there. I mean, this is, if you want to look at acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is something to reflect on. Does anybody know how many continents? Three, right? Europe, Asia, Africa. 600 years. I think other than the Roman Empire, no other empire lasted that long. Right? And this is, again, a Sunni, Hanafi, Maturidi empire. Right? Of which they are very explicit about, as we'll learn later on in the lecture. And again, it's just that there is this 500-year gap that nobody seems to know anything about. And whether it's a good or a bad thing, obviously the Shaykh Urtul, which we'll spend a little bit of time speaking about him, has sort of caused some interest in this world. But this is a world that I was exposed to after studying Islam for 6-7 years, and I was really sad that nobody taught us anything about this. That you could do the entire Alim course, you could become an entire Mufti and not know anything about this world, right? That to me, that is a loss, because as Muslims, what is the most important thing in Islam is the sanad. The sanad is what? The chain that links you back to the Prophet. Right? You cannot become an alim unless you have a sanad back to the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. That means that every hadith that I learned, I know exactly every teacher from my Bukhari teacher was Manfad Rahman A'lami, his teacher Habibur Rahman, his teacher Anwar Shah Kashmiri, his teacher Maulana Qasim, his teacher Shah Abdul Ghani, his teacher Shah Abdul Aziz Dahlawi, his teacher Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, all the way back to the Prophet. Right? And this is any alim in the Muslim world has that chain. But this is just for hadith and fiqh. What about us as Muslims? What is our link back to the Prophet historically? That we also have a historical son that we have forgotten, right? And that's why as Muslims we live in crisis. We live in we have totally forgotten what is that link back to the Prophet? You and I cannot skip generations and say that, oh no, 600 years of Islam we're just going to erase. What, everyone was deviant for 600 years? Muslims only were proper in the first 100 years, and then Salahuddin, and then the past 20-30 years somehow there was a revival. I mean, really, this is really, really foolish talking. It has harmed us, right? Because just look at 2 masjids in Istanbul. Have we in America been 50-60 years? Have we produced one masjid like that? Right? And so we have to ask, what went into that civilization? How can we as Muslims learn from that? Obviously it ended. Just like every human life ends, every civilization ends. There's no doubt about this. No civilization is going to last forever. I mean, in terms of a political entity, right? No matter how great of a conqueror you are, like Genghis Khan, your empire is going to die within 100 years. Or no matter how great an administrator like Timur Ilam, your empire is going to end. No matter how great you are as a vizier, your empire is going to end, like Nizam al-Mulk, right? No matter how great of a king like Alexander the Great or Sikandar Azam, your empire is going to end. Right? Or no matter how great your ethics are, like Khilafatul Rashida, right? Truly, who had more ethics in terms of political leadership and charisma than Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman, and Imam Ali alayhi salam? Truly, right? But still, the Khilafatul Rashida ended, right? So this is something just like the human life ends, the political life also ends. And this is not something that we need to sort of be apologetic about. And also, there's this very weird sentiment that Muslims are, they romanticize the past, they're so nostalgic. Fikratul Hanin. It's not that we're being nostalgic, it's that as Muslims we want to learn from the past, but also as Muslims we don't live in dignity today. And we do seek for an age where we did live in dignity. Where is that karama of Muslims? Where is that Muslims who lived with confidence in the world and who were not afraid of showing who they were? The Holy Prophet said in a hadith in Bukhari, alayhi salatu wasalam, al-yadul ulya khayrun min al-yadis sufla. That the giving hand is better than the taking hand. We think of this in charity, but the Prophet didn't say charity. So the giving hand can also be, as Shaykh Amin teaches us, can also be in terms of your akhlaq, in terms of your turath, in terms of your wiratha. That when you give, when you're just a consumer, when you just take values and ideas from other people, that's not the sunnah of the Prophet. The Prophet shared his values with other people, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is what we're going to see with the Ottomans, and especially with the Taymuriyya and the Mughals, right? And for me, Islamic history is very Quranic. There is no doubt. More of the Quran, actually I would say most of the Quran is about the past. The amount of ayat that are about the future, about Qiyamah, are very, very few and scattered. In the Quran, it's always about the past, right? The stories of Musa, the stories of Sayyidina Ibrahim. If Allah wanted the last revelation, He could have filled the whole book just with prophecies. But He did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do that? No. The majority of and Allah Himself explains why. What is the ayah? The last page of Surah Hud? وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. That, O Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, we teach you these old stories. These old stories, why? Why? لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. So we may make mazboot, we may make fortified your heart. So in these stories of the past, we receive a dabtul qalb, a fortifying of the heart. And that's something that I felt that no matter how much disciplines of Islam, no matter how many years of hadith and fiqh and tafsir that we studied, when you see, one thing is you see Islam in theory, and another thing you see Islam in practice, right? And when you see that, and again, this is not to say that the Ottomans are perfect and the Mughals are perfect, but they are 100 times better than what I'm seeing in the world right now in terms of bringing the akhlaq of the Prophet into the world, alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is something that you and I can barely even dream to imagine what they did with a million more challenges. They were still able to bring that into the world. Where now Istanbul is a 99% Muslim city, right? Sarajevo in Bosnia is a majority Muslim city. Albania is a majority Muslim country, right? Greece before Ataturk was they say 30-40% Muslim, right? And obviously there were even population exchanges that reduced that in the early 20th century. But again, how did this happen, right? And why are we as Muslims unable to do what they achieved? Anyways, this is just hopefully a brief introduction of why we should, again, Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Go and see and travel and journey on the earth and see Allah's system in the world. That's literally a command. This is fi'l al-amr. This is a command of Allah. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Or Allah says in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قِصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِلْأَلْبَابِ. In the old stories, in the qadim qissaha, in the old stories, there is an ibrah, there is an ethical lesson, there is a motivating lesson. لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, jiske paas dil ho. Whoever has the heart can read this. You can read the system of Allah. And this is important because the system of Allah doesn't change. Which ayah does Allah say that in? وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will never find a change in the sunnah of Allah. So what is this sunnah? Because, and again, Muslims are suffering. Muslims, don't have dignity. Muslims, by and large, in many parts of the Muslim world are living in poverty. Right, and this should hurt us. So when I look back, and I'll never forget it, and when we talk about the Mughals, we'll discuss it. Just the Mughal Empire that stretched from Kandahar all the way until modern-day Burma and Madras in the south. Now Imran looks up as soon as I say Madras. I mean that was the border from Kandahar in the west to Madras in the south to Burma in the east. One Taimuri dynasty, 25% of the world's GDP. Muslims are not living in faqa then. Iqbal says, Musalman faqa mast o jand posh ast. Zakaraj Jibra'il andar kharosh ast. Biya naqsh digar millat berezin, kain millat jahanra bari dosh ast. That he says Muslims are literally living in poverty, wa jand posh ast, like tattered clothing. Jibra'il andar kharoshas. Jibreel is weeping inside, surveying and looking at the condition of the Muslims. Biya, come, naqsh digar millat berezin. Come, let us sketch a new naqsh digar, a new image of the ummah. Kain millat jahanra bari doshas. Because this current ummah is a burden on our shoulders. Right? So when you look at the Ottomans, when you look at the Mughals, you see a civilization in which the ummah is not a burden on the shoulders of Muslims. Right? They're confident, they're intellectually sound, they're all following the Hanafi madhab, which obviously I'm very happy about. This sort of notion, right, of scatteredness, of trauma is not present, even though the Ottoman Empire started 50 years after the Mongol sacking of Baghdad. So and that trauma is a wild trauma, by the way. That's when Muhammad really moves, from Balkh to modern day Konya. I think that, as Muslims, when we study this and when we read this past, we are trying to exit our trauma, right? Because trauma doesn't stop, that one event doesn't just stop in, one day and then the next day you're okay. That doesn't happen like that. We're still sort of in this PTSD of the ummah. We don't know how to define ourselves. We don't know how to reckon with ourselves. And there's a lot of reasons, for this. But what I hope through this is to show that Muslims, despite the Mongol sacking, they were able to cultivate something that was so beautiful amidst so many cultures. Right, to inject Islam into the Serbian culture, the Balkan culture, the Greek culture, the Anatolian culture, the Bulgarian culture, the Austrian culture, the Albanian culture, all of this stuff, right? This all happens through one khandan, through one, as we're going to see with Osman and Orhan, the great Ottoman kings, is that how is it possible that one family can achieve so much, or rather one individual, and I will focus more on this when we talk about the first Mughal king, Muhammad Zahiruddin Babur. But when you read the Quran, what's very interesting is that it's always a qawm and then one single prophet. It's always, the Quran is a story about individuals, which is very interesting, right? It's always, Sayyidina Hud and Qawm Hud, or Sayyidina Lut and Qawm Lut, or Sayyidina Saaleh and Thamud, or Shu'aib and Ashab al-Aika, alayhim salam. Right? And this is very interesting, almost to say, right, to suggest that one individual does have a capacity to truly transform millions. And every Muslim that lives in the Balkans today, every Muslim that lives in Istanbul today, all of us who see the beauty of Istanbul, all of that comes under one family. Right? Obviously, there's a lot more going on. I'm not trying to be reductive here, but truly, when you see Osman and Orhan do what they do, you see that it's just, Allah accepts from whomsoever He wills. Allah yakhtassu bi rahmatihi man yasha. Allah chooses from His mercy, from His rahmah and His fadl, whomsoever He wishes. And I just want to make sure, as I mentioned on the first day, is that all of us have a fitrah, all of us have this natural disposition, but we have a personal one and we have a collective ummah-based one. And in this ummah-based fitrah, we have the memory of this entire civilization within us. We can't escape it. Even as Muslims, when we speak Urdu, Urdu itself is a Turkish word. It means army in Turkish, right? And this is, 500 million people today speak that language today, right? So you can't, even the word baji. The word baji is an old Turkic word, right, that somehow entered Urdu, Even the words we were talking about today, khurma and qima. These comes from old Turkic words. Qawurmaq meant to mince, because most of our dishes in the Desi culture comes from the Mughal, Afghan, Turkic kitchen, right? That's even the word bawarchi, that means cook, is an old Turkic phrase. So it's this meshing of civilizations is really important. Okay, is that? Do you guys see the importance, or should I still go on Quranically and prophetically?
You can still go on. Still hype it up.
Yeah. Iqbal said, Musalman sharamsar az bey gulahist. Musalman sharamsar az bey gulahist. Muslims are ashamed of losing their crown. They're ashamed of losing their political authority in the world. Tu dani ke dar jahan turasi ma chist. Do you know what Muslims have inherited after 800 years of ruling? And he was talking about Hindustan, specifically, or South Asia. That all we have is just one, how would you translate qumash? Is like a blanket, right?
Yeah.
Like, all we have is just one old blanket that a king used to own. That's it. After giving all of our lives, spreading the flags of Islam, the love of the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. In India, they used to say that during the season of the celebration of the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, they would send these qawwali groups, right? You guys know what qawwali is? They would send these qawwali groups into Hindu villages just during the season of the Prophet, and these qawwals had learned the Hindu rags. These are musical meters in Hindi. And they would just send salawat on the Prophet on these Hindi rags, and the whole village would become Muslim. And this is sort of understanding, the climate that you're in. When Aurangzeb stood outside between Hyderabad and Madras, when he conquered both cities in the 18th century, no Muslim king had ever unified India the way that Aurangzeb did. Before he enters the city, he says this dua. He says, Allahumma bihurmati Muhammad wa bihurmati ali Muhammad. O Allah, by the sanctity of the Holy Prophet and by the sanctity of the family of the Prophet, nabbihna min al-qawmi al-ghafilin. Wake us up from those who are ghafil, who are negligent and unaware. Right? And so you can see, right, the love of the Prophet, the love of Islam has animated people for 1,400 years. And it's so important for us to understand that and to see what drove them for 1,000 years. Iqbal has this poem where he says that, that my only motivation to write this poetry comes from when I read Islamic history. Right? And you can see that many of the problems that emerge from today's condition of the ummah is that they do not understand the past. The biggest crime of secularism is that it taught Muslims that all of their past and that all of what their ancestors achieved was worthless. That, oh, you're modern now, don't do what they do. They didn't know what they were doing, they weren't modern. Right? Isn't that what they teach? Right? Everybody's on their phones, but so that is something that hurt us, right? When you study the history of many of these Muslim countries, they try to break with the past, right? They don't want anything to do with the past, right? We are now modern. That's why every Muslim country is Jumhuriyya Islamiyya. Jumhuriyya Islamiyya, right? Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the idea that we're modern, right? We're a republic now. And they just add the word Islam to placate the right-wing elements. You have Jumhuriyya to placate the left-wing elements. This is something that I hope that as Muslims, to make sure that we don't have a rupture with our past, we have something much more profound and powerful that links us again, to the Holy Prophet. Because, you and I just didn't become Muslim haphazardly. There was 1,000 years of efforts that allows for this. You and I are not, I would say most of us here are not descendants of the Prophet. Most of us here are not descendants from the Ashra Mubashara, right? I can say that with a lot of conviction. And so, how do we as Muslims then define our role in this world? And how do we link ourselves back to the Prophet, right? What were the processes that underlie that? Okay, I'm done. Alayhi salatu wassalam. This is hopefully helpful. Now let's go back. So as we mentioned in Maulana Rumi talk, the Seljuk Empire emerges. The Seljuks were an empire that emerged in Central Asia, modern-day Uzbekistan. Very quickly, they emerge and they take over modern-day Anatolia. Today, modern-day Anatolia is present-day Turkey, right? And they take over. Now the Mongols come and they devastate the empire, right? And now what happens from the Seljuk Empire is different small little kingdoms emerge. So you have about 15 different principalities, or 15 different little kingdoms that sit in the Anatolian Peninsula. I wanted to put this on the screen, but I'll just put this on the map if you guys can see. This is the entire, when Urtul was born, we start with Urtul. Urtul and Mullah Rumi, by the way, are born in about 3 years apart. Urtul, I think, is 3 years older than Mullah Rumi. Mullah Rumi would have been born here, would have been raised here, and Urtul would have been born here. So they're about a 5-hour drive from each other. They're close in age, and as you can see, it's a highly fractious, highly fragmented world. By the way, all of these are Muslims. As you can see, all of these are Muslims, and you have the Byzantine Empire. So Muslims have been pushing. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu and Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu pushed all the way to here, but they stopped basically what is present-day southern Turkey and northern Syria. And that happened in 630, 635 AD. And now, about 700 years later, Muslims have now pushed all the way up until here. But yet, they're still unable to take Constantinople, the untakeable city. Right? And obviously we know the hadith where the Holy Prophet said in the Battle of Khandaq ﷺ that you will conquer Constantinople, and no doubt that was simmering in the minds of these people. Right? And as you can see, these are all Turkic tribes, and this is important. Some are Turkic and some are Tatar. I'm sure you guys have heard the word Tatar. So the Turkic tribes come from one tribe called Oghuz, and the Tatars are a different sort of non-Turkic tribe. This is becoming important when we talk about Taymur. But Urtul is born in this climate, right? So you basically have these various Turkic Muslim tribes. They're all Sunni, mostly Sunni Hanafi. I think one is Shia. And they're all basically raiding each other. When they need money, what do? They just raid a Christian village, they take some goats, they come back home. When they run out of goats, what do? They go on another raid and take some more goats and take them back to thing. So we don't have too much historical data, and that's why you don't see many people talking about, the show Urtul is about 98% fiction. The same show, he's meeting Ibn Arabi, he's meeting Mullah Rumi, he's meeting Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi. There's a lot of fiction in that because we don't have a lot of historical data. In fact, the major Sufi order after Mullah Rumi passes away actually becomes Mullah Rumi's Sufi order known as the Mevlevi order. The Mevlevi order becomes the dominant Sufi order in this entire peninsula, so much so. The Mevlevi order, by the way, when Ataturk came into power in the 1920s, he shut down every single Sufi order besides Maulana Rumi's Sufi order because of the hurma for that the Turks had for Maulana Rumi. So Konya is here, and what the Mevlevi order would do is they would send out the descendants of Maulana Rumi to various Turkic leaders. Urtul and his son Osman were so insignificant and so unconsequential that Maulana Rumi's descendants didn't even bother sending one to them. They were so inconsequential. But obviously, it's tough to read Allah's design in history. Urtul sort of begins to do what, as you see, he starts to unite various Turkic tribes here. And what he does, and Osman follows him, is that he starts to launch raids against the Byzantine Empire, which is the agency here. You can sort of see that he's crossing. But also through his charisma is that there is something very unique. And these Muslims, by the way, are very, very exhausted and constant. Also, the Turkic Muslim tribes are also fighting each other. For 100, 200 years, Muslim tribes are also fighting each other, just like in Spain. But what Osman realizes, and this sort of happens, this flow and ebb, is that this state is no longer sustainable. Either the Christians are going to come and wipe us all out because of this intra-fighting, or we have to get our act together. This is very clear from the Chronicles. And the most common word, two Ottoman words that you see in these old chronicles, the first ones were in the 15th century, is Ghaza and Ghazi. Ghaza means holy expedition, and Ghazi is a holy warrior, right? And what you see is that they are that these two words are animating Urtul, who is the father, and you have Osman, who is the founder of the empire, and they are very concerned about how do we spread Islam. So in Islam you have Darul Islam and Darul Harb, which is the abode of Islam and the abode of Harb, the abode of war, and non-Muslims, so this would have been Darul Harb, and this all would have been Darul Islam. Right? And what Osman wants to do is that he's like, listen, we can all get our act together and take Constantinople, or we can do what? Just keep fighting, raid a couple goats every year, it's sustainable, or we can have a broader vision and do a lot more with the ummah, right? We have thousands of Turkic Muslims here. Why aren't we doing anything, right? We've been here for 200 years, and with the Mughals, we'll sort of see the same thing, where the third Mughal King Akbar has a similar sort of vision for the Muslim state there. But anyways, Osman starts to expand. Right? And he's very, very particular, because what he does is he takes the Mongolian battle tactics that the Turks have learned from the Mongolians, and obviously the Mongol invasion has just happened 50 years ago, right? And Muslims back then were very quick learners. So he takes some of these battle tactics, And Usman begins to unify part of what we just saw, the northern part of the empire. And his son Orhan, who comes to power, launches an invasion up north in a city called Iznik. Iznik is right here. And he launches an invasion here, as you can see, or rather here, these are the Jandarids. He launches an invasion south, and he launches an invasion, which is this thing, Bursa. So this is basically Orhan's empire when he passes away, the son, right? Which is, again, not too big. And also what they're noticing is that the Ottomans actually have something, admirable, something aspirational, right? They're actually not a joke. And they start unifying against the Ottomans. Now, not only that, but the Christian king also starts allying with some of these Muslim principalities to undermine the Ottomans. Again, Usman, Orhan, and then their son Murad I, brilliant commander. I think this is really where you see the extent. Murad I launches a double invasion. What he does is he launches an invasion across these various Turkic principalities, and he rides across the sea, takes parts of northern Greece, he takes Bulgaria, he takes Albania, and he takes Serbia within 10 years. And obviously you need a lot of efforts to sort of predate that. And after he does that, now the Muslim world is like, what's going on, right? Who is this person? For the first time, Muslims have taken Eastern Europe. Muslims are still in Spain at this time, which is wild. So now you have Muslims, in Granada, Cordoba has fallen. You have Muslims in Granada, and you have Muslims in Albania, right? And so what's going on in Christian Europe is now they're worried, right? Because now you have Muslims on both sides of Europe for the first time in history. Because when Tariq ibn Ziyad went, they only had Spain. But when the Muslims never went into Anatolia during the Umayyad Empire. But now you have Muslims in Spain, and you have Muslims in Eastern Europe. Now what happens? There are some battles that Murad wins. We don't need to spend too much time in it, but basically he defeats a Serbian king, right? And once he defeats a Serbian king, by the way, so unfortunate, during the Bosnian genocide, the Serbians, when they were slaughtering Muslims, we all know about the Srebrenica genocide, they were shouting like death to Murad. And that anger is still there. Same too, when during the slaughter of Muslims in Gujarat, they were shouting slurs to Mahmud Ghaznavi and Aurangzeb. So this memory is still animating them, And much of the violence of Muslims, again, is sort of animated by this hurt and by this anger, So anyways, Murad defeats the Serbian and Bosnian king and his son. And so what Christian Europe decides to do is they launch a crusade. Now many people think the Crusades only ended in Palestine. That's not true. They actually launched an 8 European country crusade against Murad's son, Bayezid Yildirim. Yildirim in Turkish means thunderbolt. Eight empires: the Holy Roman Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Bulgarian Empire, part of the French army, part of the Russian army, part of the Serbs, part of the Slavs. And one Muslim king, Bayezid Yildirim, defeats all of them in one strike. So all 8 empires he destroys in one battle, so much so the Muslims would rule the Balkans all the way up until 1908. So that battle has implications for 600 years, from the 1360s all the way until 1908. What's also very striking is that what we learn, especially from Orhan, who again, you have Usman, Orhan, Murad, Bayezid. With Orhan, is that whichever town that he conquers, and this is actually we have archaeological data for, is that he establishes 3 things: a masjid, a madrasa, and a bazaar. Why these 3 things? In any given town, every town that he's conquering, he also obviously he puts a mufti there, and he has a madrasa, a masjid, and a bazaar. Right? Because you need financial independence, you need spiritual independence, and you need intellectual independence that happens with the madrasa. Right? So these first 3 things are established. The first thing that Orhan does, obviously he's minting coins, he's sending ambassadors. But what something that we need to reflect on is that the Ottomans don't conquer all of this and all of the Eastern Europe simply through military will. What they also have to do is they have to negotiate alliances, right? They're shifting and sliding alliances. And what they're so uniquely able to do is that Usman and Orhan both realize is that we have to do something that the non-Muslims aren't doing. So what do? They have this notion in Ottoman chronicles called Dar es-Salam, or an abode of peace. That, so for example, the Serbian king Stefanos, he had this policy where peasants had to work at least 3 times a week. Usman, what did he say? Obviously this is a pre-capitalist, non-capitalist world. He said that, at most, a lord of a manor, because obviously he's not forcing people to convert to Islam. But even if it's a Christian lord, a peasant should not be required to work more than 2 or 3 times a month. Right? And that changes the game, right? I mean, that is just one singular move that changes the game, right? But also, again, the sanctity of property for both Muslims and non-Muslims. And again, after all of these warring Turkic tribes where everybody sort of, the basic things, as Shaykh Ibn Khaldun teach us, and most importantly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in the Quran, that you need to have political security, aman, and amanahum, or the min ju', right? You need to provide basic food, right? You need to have basic socio-economic life. And truly this is what we see with Usman. And through his consultations, and he was one who, rather it was Murad who first appoints what's called a Qadi Askar. And now this was incredible. This is absolutely incredible. A Qadi Askar translates to what? A military judge. Because the Ottomans, they had obviously incredible mobility. In one year they're in Syria, in the next year they're in Albania. And we're going to talk about this more when we talk about Sulaiman al-Qanuni, is that mobility demanded that they needed to do that wherever they went, they needed to ensure justice. So what they do is they hire muftis and qadis within the army. So wherever the army goes, you are providing a walking and a moving justice system with the king and with the political bureaucracy, right? And then they established 3 classes, right? Called the Askariyya, the Ilmiyya, and the Sultaniyya. So you have the Ilmiyya, which are the ulama, the Askariyya, which are the military, and we'll talk about the Janissaries later, and the Sultaniyya, which are the political authority. Right? And again, this is something where you have a separation of powers, you have checks and balances. And this is truly why you can understand the longevity of the empire that lasted for so long. When so many, and by the way, the amount of Christians, when you think about the Serbs, many Serbian lords, obviously modern Serbians don't want to acknowledge this today, many Serbian lords would have rather lived under and they paid homage to the Ottoman king over their own Christian Serbian king. The Ottoman king can't face 100% of the Serbians without help. They're actually inviting Murad to come in and invade. Please take over. We want your justice. We don't want our own king's justice. Right? And so too with, we all know Dracula. You guys all know Dracula. Dracula is actually based on Vladimir, who was a rebellious Ottoman prince. He was a rebellious prince from the Romanian Empire, who was a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, who then tries to murder the Ottoman king. Right? But you can see sort of how all of this is coming together. It's been, I think, almost 45 minutes, so we'll stop there. What's very interesting is that Bayezid Yildirim, who is the great-grandson, after defeats 9 Christian armies, he loses a battle to the great-grandfather of the first Mughal king, Temur Ilan, who destroys the whole Ottoman Empire, by the way. The great-grandfather of the first Mughal king destroys the whole Ottoman Empire, imprisons Bayezid Yildirim and executes him. And that's why the Ottomans and Mughals never could get along, because the Ottomans were still sort of angry about what the Mughals had, what the ancestor of the Mughals had done to them. But within 25 years, they rebuild themselves. And within 40 years, they took over Constantinople. And that's why, the conquest of Constantinople that happens in 1453, that can only happen after 150 years of work of the Ottomans. And truly, 900 years from the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, who then, who begins that process of conquering Syria and Palestine and Lebanon and Jordan and so forth. I wanted to speak about a couple of other things, but we'll stop there. I don't know if you guys have any questions. Turn off the recording, but.